I'm still kind of basking in the glow of yesterday. I got to celebrate the 95th birthday for my grandmother. And obviously it's through internet social distancing. She's in Florida, I'm here, so it's the ultimate social distancing. And our family of 300 could not come together yesterday physically. But through Zoom and through internet and through YouTube and all these other wonderful things, you can come together. But I have been reminded over these last days of our coronavirus time, our corona time, of the aroma of my grandmother's kitchen. Anytime you went in there in the morning, you could smell bacon. And it's been great because Father Mike has turned into this great chef. Him and I live together down the street. And the thing that we've bulked up on the most is not TP, it's not water, it's pounds of bacon. And so it has been fantastic. Have you ever walked into a house with an aroma of bacon? If that doesn't get you excited to eat, I don't know what will. It's like the greatest invention of food of all time, because anything with bacon is going to taste amazing. And the other thing that reminds me, so the reason why I say this is because I used to walk into my grandmother's house in the morning there, and she'd have these amazing breakfasts just ready for you. And the aroma of bacon is what, you know those cartoons when like the aroma just catches your nose and you're just like in a trance, right? The only other scent that is just as good is brownies. And my grandmother made these amazing brownies. And that's the other thing we've bulked up on, is literally we are bulking up on brownies. And so these are our two mainstays of food that we've hunkered down with, our brownies and bacon. And being able to do that, it just brings back so many great memories for me with my grandmother, because that's exactly what she loves, our brownies, and well, she obviously loves French toast with log cabin syrup and all that, and bacon. And so during this corona time, it's hard sometimes to be in a rhythm of life that is so out of whack with our ordinary life. And maybe some of us could feel lonely. They could feel shut in. And we look at the news and the circumstances around us, and it's this consistent barrage of darkness, of death, of the seeming destruction of our country, of our economy, and even our communities. And so it's in that context that this year's Merciful Sunday of Divine Sunday is so much different than any other year. In fact, it's so much like that first Sunday in which St. Thomas, the quote-unquote unbeliever, started to believe. And maybe it's in that darkness, it's in that quarantine, it's in that being shut in that the disciples lived during this time, that we need to open up to the very wounds of Jesus and probe those wounds, to really go into what it is that the wounded, resurrected Christ brought to St. Thomas, brought to the first disciples, brought to the 5,000 who converted. You see, I think, at least for me sometimes, the distance of time from the actual fact of the resurrection 2,000 years ago till today, it can lose its power, it can lose its strength. And so that's why I think that this Caravaggio painting that perhaps you'll be able to see, and if not, just look it up. It's called the Doubting St. Thomas, or the Incredulity of St. Thomas. And this painting is so powerful because, first and foremost, it doesn't give you an image of like an angelic Jesus. Now, there are great painters like Raphael, but Raphael seems like he never stubbed his toe. It's like he never lost hair. It's like everything was perfect and floating on clouds. And that's not the way Caravaggio is. Caravaggio is dirty. Caravaggio shows Mary with dirt, and even lightly clad sometimes. And Caravaggio in this image, if you see it, has St. Thomas with a ripped shirt. Raphael and a lot of the painters of the Renaissance, they wouldn't have had ripped shirt, bare feet, and Jesus kind of losing his clothes on one side. You can even see his bare chest. I mean, no, the painters would never have done this, but Caravaggio seems to just go by all time and get right back to the rawness of what it must have been like for Thomas to probe the very wounds of Jesus. And Thomas, you can see the painting is the moment before Thomas makes this great profession of faith as my Lord and my God. And he's being drawn in by Jesus, but he's also being kind of drawn in. If you notice all four of the faces, even Jesus' face, but Peter, the bald-headed guy, he has a head like, well, Father Mike and I kind of, you just get the light just shining right off there. And then there's this kind of younger character in John, and he's in between John, and he's been between Peter and St. Thomas, who's in the closest one to us, and Jesus. And all of the eyes are focused on what, if you were a modern-day person, this E.T. moment, this touch, which isn't really from E.T., that's just a stupid American cultural thing. It really comes from the brilliance of looking through the Psalms and seeing the Dei Digitus, which is the very finger of God, which obviously Michelangelo captures in one of the greatest paintings of all time. And so Michelangelo, being influenced by that, knows that this life-touching moment when Thomas brings his ripped heart, his darkness, his loneliness, his unbelief. He had been 3 years with Jesus, and now all of a sudden he goes out because he left the community. Anytime you leave the church, you're always putting yourself in danger. Even if it means because somebody was scandalous like Judas, even if it means that somebody denied like he did, even if it means it's something like you're carrying inside like divorce or darkness or something, and you say, you know what, I'm leaving the church, because if the church did all this stuff, then I ain't a part of that church. And that's what he did. He went for a whole week like that, and then all of a sudden he comes back. And it's back in communion with the church. It's in communion with his disciples, who are all a bunch of scoundrels as well. It wasn't like Peter was holier than John or John was holier than Thomas. They all went through this, but they did it together with this trust and witness to the fact that Jesus Christ came to them to allow their woundedness to be united to the very woundedness of the Son of God. And that's our challenge today. That is exactly where we need to go. We need to take our darkness, our loneliness, our disbelief, the fact that we're frustrated because here we are in cabin fever. I mean, let's face it, the most exciting thing we're going to be able to see in sports is the stupid NFL, whatever you call that, selection and that. And like, who the heck cares about that? But that's going to be our big thing to look forward to. We should be in hockey playoffs. We should be like, baseball season, if that gets you excited. Yeah, baseball season. But no, we have to watch the NFL draft or get obsessed with Michael Jordan 20 years later. It's just, this is pathetic TV watching. It really is. And so it's time, it's time for us to realize that maybe Jesus wants to draw attention to himself. And even though he would not want a coronavirus, he will draw out of the darkness, out of the devilish work of the world, his tremendous hope of love and of mercy, and draw us to his side. One of my favorite aspects of this painting is the very finger of St. Thomas is hidden in the wounded side of Jesus. In fact, you can see the skin of Jesus. It's gross, but it's a good gross, because it shows the physical nature of our religion. Our religion is not like that movie Ghosts with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, where they're singing over a clay pottery about their love. And Patrick Swayze is some ghost figure out there. That's not who Jesus is. Jesus is not a ghost. Jesus ate with the disciples. Jesus' flesh could be moved by the disciples. You see, what Jesus is not some resuscitated spiritual ghosts singing to Demi Moore and the disciples to bring hope. He actually is physically present to them in a form of our bodies that someday we're all going to get to see. Thank God, because I look at myself in the mirror and say, is this as good as it's going to get? And maybe all of us wake up in the morning with morning breath and looking at our faces and saying, how much makeup could I possibly put on? It still wouldn't look good. But God will take care of all of that. When we get to heaven, our bodies, not just like some spiritual ghostness of us is going to be floating around in some universe of, maybe someday like reincarnate into a snail or into some type of holy cow figure. No, that's not what's going to happen. The fact of Jesus' resurrection is the greatest sign of hope for all of humanity. No matter how fat we get on bacon and brownies, when we get to heaven, if we get to heaven, the apex of our humanity is going to be up there in the final times with Jesus Christ. And so this image that Caravaggio paints is really an image of all of us right now. Notice that in the background, it's dark. They are closed in. They are all searching, the three disciples here, for reasons to hope. What's interesting about this in my mind is that all of the apostles would end up suffering for Jesus Christ. All of the apostles would end up having to be witnesses to this. And like for example, St. Peter and Andrew would be crucified upside down. Paul would be beheaded. Thomas, who's in this, would die of being speared to death by 4 people in India. And what's so cool about that? Well, that's not a cool way to die, but it is cool that he left a style of doing Mass that we call now the Malabar Rite that's resisted change for 2,000 years. And so it is so beautiful. They found this Indian community that St. Thomas the Apostle founded in India. And in my church at St. Simon and Jude a couple of years ago, they celebrate that Mass, and it's from India. And so the fact of the resurrection it's not even like we need like the virtue of faith. We just need to know that when witnesses and the amount of eyewitnesses that lined up, 5,000, all the different eyewitnesses and John and Matthew who would write about it. Just months after the resurrection, we have the earliest profession of faith of the resurrection. And then you see Matthias, who was one of those replacement guys. The one guy, Judas, he obviously didn't work out too well. So Matthias comes, and he gets replaced, and he gets burned alive. And then they always turn to John, one of the guys here, and they say, oh, John, he was the beloved, so he didn't have to suffer or die. Well, the thing is he died a natural death, but that wasn't because they didn't try to kill him. They tried to burn him in oil in Rome. Now, I never know if you've ever been burnt like by bacon grease, but it hurts. Well, imagine putting a bath around that and then trying to live. That's how John was suffered. So, yes, he was definitely the youngest and all that stuff, but he had his moment too. It's interesting, 12 men who would witness Jesus Christ by probing his wounds, seeing him, eating with him, and 5,000, and then the cascading witnesses, and finally the testimonies that would build. Chuck Colson is a friend of my grandfather's and also a member of the crew that would then get arrested in the Watergate scandal. Once wrote this: "I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put into prison. They would not have endured it if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible." And so today, we rest our Christianity not on some type of legend, myth. It's not like the beginning of the Bible scrolls out the way Star Wars in a galaxy far away with characters like Yoda. It is based on the fact that Jesus Christ was born, died, and raised from the dead. And there are witnesses to that who wrote it down, who testified to that, and have passed that on faithfully for 2,000 years. So today, let us bring our unfaithfulness, our darkness to the woundedness of Jesus Christ and allow him to bring us closer to the hope and love of his merciful heart.